Hello and welcome to episode 132 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. I'm your host, Al Manzo, joined today by the man behind the camera, usually our super producer, John Luke Chaparro. John Luke, thanks for coming on today. Matthias is out in Japan, not for the WBC, but he's not here, so we got our man, producer behind the camera, coming in front today. And we're talking, obviously Matthias is international, which that's a good transition because we've got the WBC going on, World Baseball Classic. That's what we're talking. There you go. You got your Puerto Rico jersey on already. I got my Italy hat in the back here somewhere. We're rolling. The tournament has started a couple days in. Some really good games so far. USA had a great performance last night against Brazil. So we're rocking and rolling this WBC, man. Just want to kind of get your thoughts here as the tournament gets going.
So first of all, thank you. It's nice to be in front of the camera this time around. Not many people get to see my pretty ugly face. I'm kidding. But so far the tournament is pretty entertaining. I will say, outside of the juggernauts, you talk about, United States winning, Dominican Republic winning, Puerto Rico winning, of course. Some of I don't want to say lower tiers or lower teams. They like the Australias, the Czech Republics, Chinese Taipei or Taiwan, rather, if you want to get technical with that. A lot of those games have been pretty entertaining. The
Sure.
Australia Chinese Taipei game was pretty entertaining the other day. And it's cool to see how they play the game relative to how the major leaguers play the game.
Sure.
Because if you look at, I was looking at one of the Czech Republic pitchers last night from when we recorded this, and he was only throwing about 87, 88 miles per hour relative to, let's say what Nolan McLean or Paul Skeens are going to do, or Tarek School's going to do the day of this recording when he pitches. I think it's either today when we record or tomorrow. They're going to throw 100, a limited amount of pitches and whatever.
Sure.
But it's interesting to see how the dynamic is and how they play games, and also too, to see the mercy rule in effect in some form or another. You had Chinese Taipei mercy Czech Republic 14-0. So obviously, if you didn't know the rule, it was 14-0 before the 7th. So it has to be, I think it's 15 runs.
15 after 5.
15 after
15 after
5,
10 after 7.
before 7. Yeah, 10 after 7. So it was 14. They hit the threshold and they got to the 7th inning. It was a fun game though, because it's like I said, it's interesting to see how it's played differently. And I'm enjoying it so far. And also, obviously with Team Puerto Rico being shorthanded, we'll get to that in a second. Them beating Colombia, that was really nice to see. So I always like this tournament. It's always the best. I'm not trying to dig anybody when I say this or put anybody down, but some American fans, I can't say all because I know some like it. It doesn't have the same weight it carries as it would be in Puerto Rico or in Dominican Republic or even Colombia, Mexico, all that. Those countries, those players, they say, yeah, they want to win a World Series, but if there was something else that they would want to play for, it's for their national pride. And you can see it within the atmospheres of the ballpark. So as someone who is of Puerto Rican descent, I love the United States. I am an American, but, I love to see my homeland, Puerto Rico, go all out. It's so much fun. When do you ever get to see that, really? And it's also just a sort of national pride because, Puerto Ricans and Dominicans have this natural rivalry.
Sure.
So, of course, it's always nice to kind of stick it to them a little bit whenever we beat them. So that's always a plus. So I always enjoy this tournament.
Yeah, listen, I feel like I have a lot of conversation with friends that are baseball fans, big Met fans, big baseball fans in general. I think, layered with this, it's a lot. It's a fun tournament, like you said. These players, Latin American countries, the Asian American countries, they love it. The fans love it. These countries love it. They're up for it. You look at Japan; they sold out 45,000 seats in the Tokyo Dome Wednesday for batting practice. Japan and Korea have a huge international rivalry. South Korea, I should say. There's a lot of international fans, and a lot of these players love this, like you said. I agree that I think the American side, it's hit or miss, which is, unfortunate just because of the team they have, right? Just how loaded the American squad is. But I think part of the problem and something that I've always felt about this, there's never a good time to have this. that's the unfortunate, I think, part of the tournament. Having it in, the beginning of March, and while people are, in the middle of spring training, I think that's what gives a lot of, at least American fans, probably pause. Because teams want to see their, teams do well in the regular season and postseason. That's what they're, care about, the Mets and those teams. But that's kind of the hardest part for me, is like, when is a good time to
Mhm.
have. Personally, I've always felt like, if you did what, kind of hockey does for their Olympics
Mhm.
tournaments in the middle of the season, you pause for a week or 2 weeks, you don't have an all-star game, that becomes your all-star game, so to speak.
Right.
And you let it happen. I think pitching wise, right? I think that's probably the best time of year, because pitches are lengthened out at that point. I think probably have the least worry about injury and things like that. But
Mhm.
in general, I don't think there's any good time to have it, even after the season, whatever. I've heard that in November being proposed, but it's here and it's fun. Having a full slate of
Right.
baseball like yesterday, wall to wall baseball from morning to
Mhm.
night, was a lot of fun. And watching these
Mhm.
rosters, especially like Team USA, you're talking about Dominican Republic, Japan, Puerto Rico. These are teams that have a ton of major league talent, that carry a lot of popularity. And it's fun to watch. Even in Team USA's game yesterday, they played Brazil. Obviously, they won pretty handily. I think, what outside of the, Aaron Judge hitting a home run in Team USA, getting to see those guys do their thing. Manny Ramirez's son for Brazil, Lucas, hit 2 home runs. I
Mhm.
believe he's a prospect in the Angel system. He's a young player. If people didn't know who he was before, everyone's going to know who he is now, because he didn't do it against,
Mhm.
respectfully, the Czech Republic or Australia, or although he did it against the best of the best in the U.S., and he did it pretty darn handily. The way he jacked those homers. So, that you get to see stories like that. To your point with the Czech Republic, the pitcher that struck out Altani the last time, he pitched again this time around. I don't think his fastball tops out at 80. That's like my men's league, but pitching is pitching, right? You get to see guys from all different walks of life, not necessarily powerhouses, enjoy a sport that we all love and that we all care about. So from that perspective, it's really cool. Like I said,
Mhm.
you hold your breath, especially with the injuries that happened with, Edwin Diaz, the last time around, those sort of things that worry you. But in general, these guys want to play. They're excited about
Right.
representing their country and representing those fans. And other sports have these sort of things. So why not baseball? Why shouldn't baseball have a representation of kind of the stage to the world?
Right. And the thing that you noted too about the in-season tournament, those tournaments generally do pretty well for their respective sports. At least related to the NHL. The NBA usually does theirs in the summer
Sure.
before their regular season because they do play in the Summer Olympics, but it does bring a lot of hype to the sport as it goes to their regular season. You saw it's Olympic basketball in the summer leading up in training camp. And even
Hmm.
even the NHL has a tournament like that with the World Cup of Hockey that takes place during training camp late August and early September, or throughout September before the regular season starts in October. And obviously you mentioned the Olympics that takes place right smack dab in the middle of the season. Now, the good thing about that tournament is that that tournament happens right as the playoff races are really in the thick of it. So hockey is already at a high if you're a fan. So
Sure,
having
sure,
an
sure.
international tournament, best on best. And even with the Four Nations tournament last season in the NHL, that happened at the All Star break, and I think that has probably gotten the attention of not only the NBA but also Major League Baseball because you talk about these international tournaments. Um, like you said, when is a good time to do it? Optimally, it's either the summer where everybody is still warm, and a lot of people have that same thought because there has been discussions about potentially putting the Olympic, because baseball is going to be a
Yep.
sport in LA in 28, of putting the Olympics essentially as the All-Star break. And honestly, as not only a fan, but also just as a baseball purist, I think that would be fantastic. Obviously, you know, on the purist side, losing the All-Star game would kind of, some people would whine about it because out of all the sports, the All-Star game, at least for baseball, is probably the most authentic one to this day because you still have to
Sure.
play. No matter what type of baseball you have to play, you still have to
Right.
play baseball.
Yep.
Hockey, football, and with hockey, football, and all the other sports, basketball, you could phone it in.
Yeah.
Baseball, you still have to play. But I think overall, with just coming off of the success of the Team USA winning gold at the Olympics, this is the perfect time for Major League Baseball to use this World Baseball Classic as sort of like a stepping stone, as sort of like a launch pad for the sport. I think that would, you have to send best on best out to LA. It'll be at Dodger Stadium. It's not in some foreign country
Sure.
out in the middle of Europe or something like that. And I think they should do it. And in relation to this tournament, this is supposed to be, like I said, the precursor. And when you have stories like Manny Ramirez's kid hitting 2 home runs for Brazil, or the regular Joe Schmo from Czech Republic, or even former major leaguer Jose Contreras' son getting Aaron
Sure.
Judge to ground out into a double play, breaking
Yep.
his bat, 17 years old. Sal, do you want to know what I was doing when I was 17 years old? I was watching Conan O'Brien clips on YouTube at 17 years old. I wasn't striking out a major league hitter at the time or getting him to ground into a double play. So stories like that are really important. And also, too, just about this tournament is that these players who are kind of fringe, they get to shine on a bigger level where more
Sure.
people can see it. There's numerous stories of pitchers or hitters who were able to get major league contracts because of how they performed in this tournament. So, the Major League Baseball has an opportunity right now to say, let's capitalize on this and let's make sure we can use this to grow the game, because that's the most important thing out of all of this. Baseball, we do this because we have a love of the game. We root, we write, we produce all this stuff because we love the game of baseball. And the World Baseball Classic is probably the best avenue to do that outside of obviously the regular season, of course, and the playoffs.
Sure. Yeah, no, I agree. And with the Olympic aspect, I think there's more to that. I think Manfred is pushing that because cynically, I think there's not going to be a season next year, and they're going to absolutely need to get popularity back to the sport. And best way to do it, you have an Olympic Games that everybody's watching. You send your best out there. Maybe people forget you didn't play baseball for a year, but that's
Mhm.
that's a whole nother conversation. We'll have that in
Right.
December of next year. But I agree. I think it is about, if you're talking about growing the game, and looking at the popularity of this. And I think in general, you talk to this tournament, I think you look at the level of competition from countries that have now you've seen get better over the years. A team like I think of Australia. A lot of people probably don't know, but there's very competitive professional baseball leagues in Australia. The Australian Baseball
Mhm.
League, which plays in our winter, their summer, very competitive. As far as prospects that go there in the winter, and just Australian-born players themselves. We think of the professional leagues in Latin America and in the Asian countries, but there are other places doing as well. Europe, Team Italy has a sneaky roster. A lot of
Mhm.
obviously major league players. There's a couple of Italian-born players on there as well. Italy's another country that's very competitive professional baseball, probably the most in all of the European leagues. So we talk
Mhm.
about it being America's pastime, but it is definitely a global game and diverse in that sense. I feel like we don't think about that as
Mhm.
baseball in general, but there's a lot of you look at a major league clubhouse in general. There's so many different backgrounds and
Mhm.
diversity that's in there. So it's cool to see it now reflected in this kind of international tournament, like we're talking about. And the whole pool play thing is cool because obviously you got to win, but there's also the runs total that can help. Sort of like the Olympics. So it's a sprint, not a marathon. So you get that we're not necessarily used to in baseball, and we get to see, like to your point, players necessarily you may not know of or hear of. We get to see, you know, Aaron Judge and Bryce Harper and these great players facing guys that they've never seen before, right? So they may be an electrician,
Mhm.
but they'll strike out Shohei Ohtani because they've first time they're seeing this guy. You know what I mean? They have no
Mhm.
information or anything like that. So it kind of levels out a little bit more of the playing field and makes it more interesting. So, I think it's a fun tournament. They're doing obviously all the major league rules outside of the ABS. So
Mhm.
that's for fans, I think easier now, more concise to follow along because it's rules that we've now for a couple of years been used to. And I'm sure that the
Mhm.
players kind of feel the same way. They don't have to switch back and forth. But it's I have actually another example talking about Team Canada, another country that's gotten better every year or every time we've seen this baseball wise, talent wise. I mean, Mexico almost made it to the final last year. They were almost beat Japan. So there's
Mhm.
it's not just a guarantee. Obviously, we know like the top 3 teams, but there are a lot of countries in this tournament, especially this year, that could do surprise a lot of people.
Right. And, with these pool plays and these like shorter tournaments, that allows for, kind of an underdog team to sort of, kind of make their impact. You know, I, you know, I'd have to include Puerto Rico into that sort of
Sure.
kind of discussion because of, not having
Right.
Lindor Correa and Baez
Yep.
in the tournament. So, the two best players on that team on Team Puerto Rico are Edwin Diaz and Nolan Arenado, and
Yep.
that's fine. They still have a lot of talent. The coaching staff is probably legendary. Edgar Martinez, Yadier Molina, Juan Gonzalez, just to name a few. So they're in good hands. But with these short tournaments, you can have a team like Team Canada come in and potentially upset a Team USA, because the thing about baseball is that you know you can defy the odds with just how the game is played. And
Sure.
when you take a look at some of these rosters, you can, pretty much pinpoint almost a major league player on pretty much every team. I think of I don't want to say the most obscure, but I think of in Chinese Taipei, I think of Yu Chang.
Sure.
Obviously, Japan has Shohei Ohtani, Munetaka Murakami. Puerto Rico has Edwin Diaz. Nolan Arenado. Team Canada, I am drawing a blank with Team Canada right now, but they do have major league talent on that team, though. I'm sure I'm probably missing a name that's probably there. Obviously, with Team Italy, you could think of a guy like Vinny Pasquantino. So
Hmm.
it's not like if unless and you talk about Australia too. They've been a force to a degree every single tournament they've been in. They've been able to qualify and stay in the fight for pretty much since the tournament's inception.
Sure.
You
And
know, I
especially this year, they have Travis Bazzana,
right.
um, who's a top prospect for the Indians. They have the White Sox top catching prospect Teal, I think his last name is. They have some
Mhm,
guys too. Like I said, it's not there's not as much of a gap between all these guys as we thought maybe 15 years
mhm,
ago or whatever else.
mhm.
These countries have good athletes and they're catching up in a way. And that's only good for baseball. That can only help the sport.
Mhm.
Now we got to get an international draft. They got to figure that out. Do
Yeah.
that next. Do that next.
Yeah,
But
that
what?
that will save a lot of, grief with, just kinda the whole international draft pool, but we'll leave that to Mike. Mike has a better grasp on that.
Exactly. No, exactly. But real quick with Puerto Rico, you talked about Puerto Rico. There is that insurance thing. I know we were talking about it a bit. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Obviously, it hurts a team like Puerto Rico, like we were talking about. But that's probably the only looming thing with this, right? Kind of last minute, a bunch of guys weren't allowed or denied through insurance. A bunch of players on a bunch of teams. I don't really know the rhyme or reason why some were allowed and some weren't. When you look at certain players that were allowed to play that and that weren't. But I guess so goes it. I don't know if Edwin Diaz's injury a few years ago had anything to do with that. I imagine it might. These companies or whatever that are insuring and the teams get shy. I have no idea, but obviously that was kind of a little bit of a cloud before the tournament started here.
Yeah, the thing about the whole insurance thing, and it's a bummer because obviously you want to send the best on best, and you know with Lindor it was a bit more understandable because he was more than likely going to miss it anyways with the
Sure.
helmet bone injury, so that would have
Right.
been it would not have been great, but it would have been understandable. But with Correa and Baez, and with Baez's suspension for some reason with the marijuana, and then Correa's not being allowed because of his ankle, really makes no sense to me because we have other players like you mentioned. You could
Hmm.
even throw in Edwin Diaz at like almost 2 years after his injury at the 23 tournament. Um, it just doesn't make any sense to me, and especially when you had that mystery buyer, or not buyer, but mystery funder, who it turned out to be Bad Bunny of all people, who was willing to pay the insurance claim for those players, or at least for Correa and Lindor.
Right. Right.
They said apparently they didn't do the paperwork on time or whatever, this, that, and the fourth or whatever. But, you know, I think that this is sort of like a precursor to something that might not be great, because then w- what happens if somebody on Team USA ends up not having to do that really wants to play? Let's say,
Sure.
forbid, something happens to Paul Skeens and he can't play because of insurance, even though he's able to play, but all this technicality comes up. You're robbing, the tournament of something that's great. Look, I'll say this about the Team Puerto Rico roster. And this is no slight to any of them. I
Sure.
think all solid major league players. They're definitely a lot better than me because all I was able to achieve playing baseball was basically rec league baseball. That goes to show how good I am, you know. But you know, it would have really have helped having either a Correa or even a Baez to kind of fight. Because usually every time this tournament comes around, there's usually sort of with Team Puerto Rico, there's always a couple of big guys that come on and play. Like in 23, you had
Sure.
Lindor. Correa didn't play because of his ankle, but you had Baez, you had Kike Hernandez. So there was a little bit more firepower to add to the team already. And we were hoping that this year we'd be able to get all three. And I say hoping like I'm part of the team, but I do the same Puerto Rican blood as they do, so I can say
Sure.
that.
Sure.
But it doesn't make any sense to me, and I'm trying not to let it dampen the tournament for me because I'm watching Puerto Rico play baseball, so that's just a joy in its own right. Because just kind of touching back on something that we said before, Puerto Rico has a really strong league down in Puerto Rico, and it's some of the
Right.
most electric baseball you can find, and a lot of that energy comes up into the World Baseball Classic, not only just with the players but with the fans. You know, like these guys, the major league players follow their hometown teams as they play or as they live up here, or if they're
Sure.
not able to play, they follow them. So, these guys want to play for their country, and to see it kind of taken away a little bit because of insurance just kind of mystifies me. Just like you, I don't know why or how. Maybe there's somebody who can explain to us that says, hey, this is why it happened. If it doesn't make sense to me, I'm willing to understand it, but it just kind of put a little bit of a dampen on it because I look, as much as I got on Carlos Correa for the whole Mets thing and his ankle and Scott Boras and all that, I still want to see the guy play for Team Puerto Rico because he's
Sure.
still a damn good baseball player by all means. I want to see Francisco Lindor play and be healthy for Team Puerto Rico, but these companies want to come in and make all these things. And to make it even more confusing, the Mets were fine with sending Lindor out there, and I'm sure the Astros were fine with sending Correa, and the Tigers were fine with sending Baez.
Hmm.
So again, not to slight Team Puerto Rico, but when you have to play against the Team Dominican Republic, with all that firepower, you can only hope that the Dominican Republic does what they normally do, and this is the fan coming out in me, that they just kind of choke in the big spot like they always do. So, but it's just disappointing. It's just disappointing because I feel like a lot of these companies come in, and you could make the argument about this happening to everybody else in daily life with insurance and all that. That's another podcast for another platform. But and relative to this, it kind of seems like they just like to throw cold water on things all because they're trying
Sure.
to save a buck, and it sucks because you want to see best on best.
Yeah.
Whether it's the
Yep.
Olympics, World Baseball Classic, or whatever. I can't imagine the loopholes they're going to have to go through if they end up sending major league players out to LA, but you just hope that they're able to have some discussions with the International Olympic Committee and whatever insurance company is insuring. And listen, to Bad Bunny, Benito, if you want to send out money to do that for 2028, start saving up. I know you have the money for it.
You don't even need to say it. He's got it. He's
You don't
ready to
even
go.
say it, like just do it.
Ready to
Like
go.
Vamonos. Let's go, my man. Let's do
Yeah.
this. Protect, get that all insured. But it's just kind of a bummer, and just hopefully that this is sort of like a one-off thing, and that going forward with the next tournament after the Olympics, of course, because I think this
Sure.
tournament is every 3 years or so.
Yep. Yep.
So the next tournament will have to happen after the Olympics. Hopefully that they can get this squared out because, truth be told, not to say that Puerto Rico is going to be bad, but it's kind of a bummer, and it's going to happen to somebody else at some point if they don't
Sure.
change the way
Sure.
that they operate.
Yeah, no, agreed there. Hopefully they can figure this out because, like I said, players want to be able to play for their countries and represent, and you want the best talent you can. So hopefully they can figure that out. And I think Major League Baseball is going to have to go to the IOC and say, please, we don't have Mark McGuire and Sammy Sosa this time. You have to let us in. So again, different time, another discussion for another time. But if I
Yeah,
had a crystal
yeah.
ball, I think that's what we're working with. But listen, I have Canada and Colombia on right now. After we get off
Mhm.
here on the Fox Sports app, I'm going to put on Team Italy, watch them play against Brazil. Hopefully, Manny's kid doesn't hit any more home runs against Italy or anything. But man, what a swing! That was beautiful. The second home run
Always,
that kid
just
hit
like his
last
dad.
night was the
Mhm.
worst call I've ever heard. It sounded like it was a fly ball, and it was 20 feet back, 20 rows back into the stands. So,
Listen,
um,
if Fox Sports wants to hire me, I do play by play.
you know what? I don't think it could have been been any less enthusiastic than that one. I was very confused. But hey, it's spring training for everybody too, right? So I think we'll leave it here. The next time we talk to you, hopefully Team USA's in the semifinals or the finals by then. But obviously, we'll keep going here with the WBC. Keep you updated with everything else going on in spring. And as always, guys, let's go Mets and Team